torn curtain flapped in the winter wind. Blood dried in a fan shape across a marble floor. A child's sandal too small for a man, too pristine for the poor, lay toppled beside the cold body. They said his mother screamed for hours before she went silent. Her throat tore from begging. The neighbors said nothing. This was Rome. Rome, in the age of golden excess and invisible crimes. This was the birth of a boy called Sporus. A name that sounded like a joke even then. It meant seed, or perhaps more cruelly, sowing. Later, poets would argue over whether his name was a bitter irony or a twisted prophecy. Today, we unravel the forgotten horror of the boy who was made into an empress. A boy whose beauty condemned him to wear a dead woman's face. Sporus was born in the shadow of imperial walls, somewhere near the Palatine, some guessed, though others claimed his parents were household slaves. Nothing is certain except this. He was too pretty for his own good. The Roman world prized masculine strength, sun-darkened skin, loud gestures. Sporus was the opposite. Pale, frighteningly delicate, large, tear-shaped eyes that looked older than they should have. By age 10, he had already learned to walk with his eyes lowered, not out of humility, but as a defense. People stared. Some wanted to touch his face, thinking he was a girl. Others whispered and crossed the street. Historians still debate whether he was born a slave or a freedman's son. Either way, it didn't matter. Rome did not give beautiful children the luxury of anonymity. By 13, he was inside the Domus Aurea, the golden house of Nero. Not as a guest. Not even as a servant. He was there as what? A gift? An ornament? A diversion? The records are sparse. What they do agree on is that he arrived quietly and that he never truly left again. It began with a glance. Nero, walking through one of his perfumed courtyards, caught sight of the boy kneeling beside a fountain, washing something. The emperor stopped, stared. He didn't ask the boy's name. He asked who he belonged to. In that moment, Sporus stopped being a person. Nero's court was a rotting circus in silk. Lavish banquets served with flamingo tongues and fermented fish paste. Women powdered with gold dust. Men dressed as satyrs, drunk by midday. The emperor, bloated from years of indulgence, wore eyeliner and sang for hours in private theaters. But even among all this absurdity, Sporus stood out. He was not just beautiful. He was uncanny. Nero couldn't stop looking. And that was dangerous, because Nero was grieving. Poppaea Sabina, Nero's beloved second wife, had died suddenly. The official tale was illness, but no one believed that. The truth seeped out like pus from a wound. Nero had kicked her in the stomach during an argument. She was pregnant. She died screaming. In his haze of guilt and rage, Nero began searching for her again. Not spiritually, physically. The court grew quiet. Every beautiful girl was suddenly sent away, lest the emperor think her a candidate. And then he found Sporus. Not a girl, but not a man either. The resemblance, they said, was haunting. And in that instant, the decision was made. Sporus would be Poppaea. The boy was locked away for weeks. No one is sure what happened inside those chambers. But when he re-emerged, he no longer walked like a boy. His hair had been oiled and curled. His eyebrows darkened. He wore the robes of an empress in waiting. The eunuch's knife had done its work. There were rumors, horrible lingering rumors, about how the operation was performed. Roman castration was not a standard procedure. It was illegal in most provinces. But the emperor had money. He had Greek physicians. He had wine to dull the screaming. Sporus never fathered children. He never grew facial hair. His voice stayed soft, wavering. And the palace whispered that the resemblance to Poppaea had grown frightening. Some say Nero wept the first time he saw the boy dressed fully in his dead wife's robes. Others say he laughed and clapped, delighted with his own blasphemy. Either way, Sporus had become something new. Not a boy, not a girl, not a lover, not a slave, not even a pet. He was an echo, painfully alive, of a woman who was already dead. He called him Sabina, not Sporus, not boy, not slave, just Sabina. And he made others say it too. From senators to kitchen girls, from bodyguards to poets. Everyone in Nero's orbit learned to address the castrated child as the dead empress returned. One slip of the tongue could cost a tongue. The transformation was not gradual. It was not gentle. It was a hammer blow to the palace's already trembling sense of reality. Nero didn't just dress Sporus in women's clothing. He forced the entire imperial household to pretend that Poppaea had come back. The same voice, the same clothing, the same regal walk across mosaic floors. But with haunted eyes and a stitched silence. The marriage came next. It was not done in secret. There was no shame. It happened in public under Rome's night sky, with torches and musicians and guests forced into nervous applause. Nero placed a veil over Sporus's head, Poppaea's own veil, most believed, and led him through a parody of a Roman wedding ceremony. Historians still argue whether this was grief, madness, or calculated performance. But no one argues that it was grotesque. The crowd clapped. They had no choice. Sporus, face painted like a bride, barely blinked. There is no record of his voice. Not a single sentence survives. Some say he never spoke again after the operation. Others claim he whispered lines he was told to memorize, phrases Poppaea used to say. To call it abuse would be too small. This was ritual desecration. A corpse was being walked about, breathing, dressed, kissed, and paraded. But the corpse was a living child. Nero kept Sporus beside him at every event. Feasts, games, performances, there was the new empress at his side. Some observers recoiled. Others gossiped about how closely the boy matched Poppaea's movements. It was impossible, some whispered. Was he trained? Hypnotized? Possessed? One senator joked that the emperor had finally solved the problem of infidelity. He married a woman who cannot betray him, because she has no body left to betray with. The joke cost him his position, possibly his head, but others followed suit. One day, a satirist scrawled graffiti in the Subura. The Empress reborn, now lighter, quieter, and without the fuss of childbirth. It was painted over within an hour. Meanwhile, inside the palace, Sporus was drowning in silks and silence. He was not allowed to leave the emperor's presence. Nero would call for Sabina at odd hours, demanding his bed be warmed, his forehead be kissed, or his song be judged. At feasts, Nero would toast to her radiant beauty, and the guests would raise their cups in forced celebration. And yet, Nero never stopped mourning Poppaea. He built statues of her. He forced the Senate to declare her a goddess. He insisted on sacrifices to her memory. And all the while, he kept her image alive in the fragile, mutilated body of a child. This was not love. It was obsession performed as policy. Behind the golden curtains of the Domus Aurea, Sporus began to fade. He stopped eating. He became alarmingly thin, even for a eunuch. His skin turned pale, like parchment stretched too tight. His eyes no longer tracked conversations. When spoken to, he nodded. That was all. One day, a physician noted a strange mark behind his ear, possibly an infection, possibly the result of a slap. Nero, upon hearing this, ordered the man whipped for insulting the empress's health. No one dared to look too closely after that. Even in his worst moments, Nero never stopped flaunting the illusion. Once, during the Ludi Romani, the great games of September, Nero rode into the arena wearing a purple toga, dragging a chariot of white horses. Behind him stood Sporus, dressed as a Roman goddess, holding laurel wreaths above Nero's head. The crowd roared with forced adoration, terrified of what silence might bring. There was one strange moment that remains in several accounts. Nero paused his performance, turned to the audience, and gestured toward Sporus. "Behold," he said, "the only woman who never left me." Some claim the words were met with stunned silence. Others say laughter erupted, from fear, not humor. At this point, the emperor's madness was no longer debated in whispers. He had murdered his own mother. He had kicked his pregnant wife to death. He had married a boy he mutilated to look like her. Rome was bleeding under taxes and threats. The Senate shuffled nervously. His Praetorian Guard watched him like men guarding a sleeping lion. And still Nero smiled. Still he sang. Still he called for Sabina each night, and the boy would appear in white silk, with hands folded and eyes empty. Sporus, if he still lived within that shell, had vanished behind a mask even he could no longer remove. He had become a shadow pretending to be a ghost. And the ghost still danced. They gave him pearls. Not a crown. Not a scepter. Not even the title of Augusta, though Nero hinted at it often. But pearls, heavy, warm, unnatural. Strands of them coiled around Sporus's neck, wrist, ankles. They slid across his skin like serpents, cold reminders of his gilded captivity. Pearls were the ultimate mark of decadence in Rome, rivaled only by purple-dyed cloth. They were traded across continents, brought in by ship from the Indian Ocean, weighed and polished until their opalescent glow could catch fire in candlelight. And now they were a collar. In the halls of Nero's pleasure palace, Sporus became a living tableau. Nero's interior decorators, once tasked with arranging gold leaf mosaics and frescoes of Greek myths, now crafted daily scenes with Sporus at their center. One day, the boy would be arranged in the garden, reclining like Venus. The next, seated at the emperor's feet, silently spinning dyed wool, playing the domestic goddess. He was not spoken to, only admired, gawked at, and occasionally kissed by Nero in front of company. This was not love. This was necromancy. No child should be turned into a monument to grief. Behind closed doors, Sporus endured the emperor's temperamental affections. When Nero wept for Poppaea, Sporus was made to sing lullabies. When Nero raged at the Senate, Sporus was ordered to stroke his hair. When Nero feared assassination, daily now Sporus was summoned to sleep beside him, because even a false Poppaea could still ward off demons. One night, after a particularly extravagant banquet involving roasted peacocks and wine poured from onyx jugs, Nero demanded that Sporus perform a scene. A reenactment. The scene of Poppaea's death. He lay on the marble floor while Nero circled him, rehearsing the fatal words he had screamed that day. "Why must you shame me in front of my guards? Why must you provoke me?" A servant spilled wine in the silence that followed. Nero turned and had the man dragged away. No one saw him again. Afterward, Nero sobbed into Sporus's lap, calling him his little dove, his immortal Sabina. It is unclear what Sporus felt. There are no letters, no confessions. But a strange fact appears in court records around this time. 3 members of Nero's inner circle, men known for their quiet defiance, were found dead within a week. All 3 had used the boy's real name in public. The message was clear. Speak your name or be silent forever. Still, cracks began to show. Nero's hold on Rome was slipping. His military campaigns had failed spectacularly. The treasury, drained from his festivals and architectural monstrosities, demanded more taxes. The Senate's loyalty grew brittle. The Praetorian Guard was being courted by rivals. And beneath it all, the people whispered about the emperor's boy. They saw him in the markets, flanked by guards, buying saffron and rosewater. They saw him at gladiator games, seated beneath Nero's box, smiling without expression. They saw him bathing in a public therme once, veiled and silent, while attendants blocked any curious eyes. And they began to talk. Was this what Rome had become? A place where emperors turned orphans into wives? Where death was not the end, but a costume one could force upon the living. One scribe, anonymous, clever, scribed a biting line into the underside of a statue. Better to be born a vulture in Rome than a beautiful child. Nero grew paranoid. He started hosting nighttime trials. Enemies real and imagined were charged, tortured, executed. Sporus was always nearby, holding a lily or a scroll, watching. Some claimed his presence was symbolic. Others believed it was strategic. Nero trusted no one, not even his generals. But he trusted the boy who could not grow old, could not rebel, could not leave. Meanwhile, Nero's physicians noticed a change. His body was failing. The emperor had grown bloated, unable to walk without support. His singing voice cracked. His skin broke out in purple splotches, likely a liver issue from years of alcohol and overindulgence. He became afraid of mirrors. He began ordering Sporus to sleep fully dressed, veiled, facing away. Poppaea's image was slipping from the boy's features, and Nero couldn't bear it. To solve this, he commissioned a mask. An artist was brought in from Alexandria, skilled in waxwork. He was instructed to create a perfect likeness of Poppaea's face. It was molded from old busts, funeral portraits, even a death mask hidden in the vaults. Sporus wore it for the first time during a Saturnalia feast. Accounts say some guests vomited when they realized what they were looking at. The mask didn't quite fit. It shifted when he turned his head. One side drooped. But Nero declared it a miracle. He kissed the wax lips before an audience of 200. The boy beneath the mask did not move. There are fringe accounts, apocryphal perhaps, of Sporus attempting escape during this period. A runaway attempt foiled by a guard. A suicide thwarted by an accidental knock at the door. But the boy never left. He continued to perform, to sit, to walk, to sleep beside the madman who had destroyed his body and stolen his identity. He was neither free nor forgotten. He was the most famous woman in Rome, and he was dying by inches. The fires came first. Rome burned in the summer of 64. 6 days of flame, 2 days of smoke. 11 of the city's 14 districts were consumed. Bodies floated in the Tiber. Marble cracked. Statues melted. Ash fell like snow on the city's shattered roofs. Nero watched from his private theater on the Palatine Hill, strumming a lyre. He did not start the fire, though many believed he had. What he did do, without hesitation, was seize the opportunity. With the old city gone, he could rebuild it in his image, golden, grotesque, godlike. He began planning a new palace, even larger than the Domus Aurea. And still, at his side, veiled and obedient, was Sporus. They say he never blinked during the fire. He stood beside Nero as the city screamed, unmoving, like a ghost watching its own funeral. When the emperor declared the flames a divine cleansing, the boy nodded. When Nero offered a hymn to Apollo, Sporus bowed. And when the emperor began sacrificing Christians in the garden, lighting them as human torches, Sporus scattered flower petals at their feet. Some say he chose the lilies himself. But beneath the theatrics, Rome had turned. The people, once amused or apathetic, had grown sick with fear. Whispers turned into chants. Murmurs into threats. Nero's name was spat in the streets. Graffiti declared him the beast of Babylon, the matricide emperor, and most insultingly, the bride of a boy. He had become a national embarrassment. And Sporus, trapped behind veils and waxen silence, was now part of the crime. When Nero heard that Galba, the grizzled governor of Hispania, was marching on Rome with support from the Senate and the Praetorian Guard, he did not react with fury. He reacted with disbelief. How dare they, he is said to have whispered, "I am divine." No one answered him. For the first time, Nero's guards refused to carry out his orders. The palace grew quiet. Servants fled. Senators vanished. Musicians, actors, courtiers gone. Only Sporus remained. On the final day, Nero begged a few remaining loyalists to flee with him. He clutched a small box of emerald rings, a jar of scented oil, and Sporus, still dressed in white. He called him my soul, my destiny, the last comfort of the empire. They ran, through backstreets, past ruins, into the countryside. Nero had no plan. He changed disguise 3 times. Sporus rode beside him on a mule, covered in a dark cloak. Some say they slept in a grain silo. Others say they begged a freedman for food. What is certain, Nero could not face the end. He tried to persuade Sporus to kill himself alongside him. A joint farewell, as he called it. The boy said nothing. Then Nero turned to his freedman Epaphroditus. The final act was clumsy. The emperor could not drive the blade in. He begged Epaphroditus to help. The wound was deep, but not instant. Blood soaked the ground. His last words were barely audible. "What an artist dies in me." Sporus stood nearby, watching, unmoving, again, always. And suddenly he was free. Or so it seemed. The death of Nero marked the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. But it did not mark the end of Sporus's nightmare. He was no longer an empress. But he was still a symbol. A creature people remembered, pointed at, feared, pitted, mocked. Rome did not forget its walking scandal. He was taken in by Nymphidius Sabinus, a Praetorian commander who had helped betray Nero. Sabinus had ambitions of his own. He styled himself as the next emperor. And like Nero before him, he wanted Sporus beside him. He paraded the boy in public, calling him my empress and the last treasure of Rome. Sporus was once again dressed, painted, veiled. A new mask, a new stage, the same role. But Sabinus's bid for power failed before it began. The Praetorians turned on him. He was slaughtered in the street. Sporus was passed on, like a cursed relic. The next man was Otho, another claimant to the throne. A former friend of Nero's, known for his vanity and cruelty. And once again, Sporus was dragged into his household. Otho dressed him, displayed him, adored him, then lost him in a single battle. By now, Sporus had become more myth than man. He was the boy who lived through emperors, the ghost wife, the false empress, the creature too cursed to die. And then he met his final captor, Vitellius. The new emperor had a cruel streak and a flair for theatrical punishment. Vitellius decided to make Sporus the centerpiece of a public execution. He announced a mock wedding, a parody of Sporus's original union with Nero. In this nightmare theater, Sporus would be married to a gladiator. After the ceremony, he would be raped to death on stage before a cheering mob. Rome would laugh. The horror would be complete. The date was set. The invitation sent. But Sporus did not attend. The night before the mockery, he took his own life. No one knows how, only that he died quietly, alone. At last, he controlled the scene of his own ending. Historians argue still, was Sporus a victim? A collaborator? A cipher? A creature of survival? We will never know. He left no voice, only echoes. In the days after Sporus's death, Rome moved on. The games resumed. New scandals erupted. Emperors came and went, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, Vespasian, each one clawing for power in a city drunk on spectacle. The memory of Nero faded into parody. His busts were defaced. His name scrubbed from monuments. His golden house was pillaged, its gilded ceilings ripped down, the vast reflecting pool drained and filled with rubble. But Sporus did not fade. He remained, not as a man, not as a boy, but as a shadow in the margins of history, a strange, chilling footnote too grotesque to erase. He had lived longer than any of Nero's wives, longer than Nero himself, longer than most senators, generals, or poets of the time. And yet, every moment of that life was a performance choreographed by someone else. He had no recorded age, no family name, no grave, just a place in whispered memory. Some Roman poets wrote verses, oblique and cruel. They called him the little ghost in silk, or the silent wife who outlived the flame. One satirical playwright produced a short, band piece titled The Second Poppaea, in which Sporus was played by a woman pretending to be a boy pretending to be a woman, a grotesque mirror held to the empire's worst indulgences. It was not performed again. And yet, in some strange way, Sporus haunted the empire more effectively than any marble statue. His presence lingered unsettling, a mirror of Roman vanity and violence, too obscene to name, too familiar to forget. Modern scholars still debate the meaning of his story. Some argue he was Nero's most tragic victim, his life stolen, his identity obliterated. Others wonder if he held more agency than we know. That perhaps, behind the veils and pearls, behind the mask of Poppaea, there was a spark of calculation, a survival instinct so acute it could mimic love, subvert death, and manipulate madness. There's even one fringe theory, found scribbled in the margins of a Vatican manuscript, that claims Sporus had a twin, that the real Sporus died during the castration and was replaced by a look-alike servant, that Nero never noticed, that the entire story was theater, one final deception in a world already drowning in illusion. But that theory has little evidence. What we do have is an imperial coin long forgotten, recovered from the Tiber in 1939. It bears no name, no emperor, no date, just the image of a veiled figure, eyes downcast, wearing strands of pearls. A ghost in silver. One historian, half serious, suggested it might be Sporus. Not an official mint, not a tribute, just a whisper from someone, somewhere, who saw what had happened and dared to press it into metal. A memory that could not speak, but would not die. Because in the end, Sporus was not just a victim. He was a mirror, held up to the most grotesque instincts of imperial Rome. The hunger for power, the worship of beauty, the refusal to let the dead stay dead. And perhaps that's the most terrifying part of his story. Not the castration, not the masks, not the slow, cold performances he was forced to endure, but the fact that no one ever asked who he was before Nero chose him. Not once. Not even after he died. He entered history not as a boy, but as a replacement. And Rome never let him be anything else. Word count, 1,021. Wind down, 300 words. Now the scene softens. The marble halls of Nero's palace crumble, overtaken by moss and silence. The gardens are dead, the statues chipped, the masks left to rot in sealed chambers beneath the earth, their wax faces warped by time. Imagine the pearls, once symbols of absurd luxury, scattered in the dust, now dull, forgotten. Rome has changed. The empire fell. The gods were replaced. But the echo of Sporus remains, drifting like incense through history's darker corridors. A symbol not just of cruelty, but of how power reshapes identity, flattens the self, and forces masks onto the unwilling. In every court that twists the truth, in every stage that demands obedience, in every ruler who cannot mourn without resurrecting the dead, Sporus lives there. He is not a cautionary tale, nor a martyr. He is something more rare and more unsettling, a person erased in life and remembered only in horror. A boy, then a wife, then a ghost. And yet, if you listen carefully, in the ruins of Rome, beneath the din of chariots and cries and fire, you might still hear the softest sound. Pearls falling from trembling hands.